All right, good afternoon. Thank you very much for attending our live webinar today. If you're watching this on YouTube, then there's some contact details at the end of this presentation that you can get follow up with. And if you're if you're live with us, then obviously you can ask questions during the session. So please feel free to do that. Today's webinar in a series that we've done throughout the year is another case study, and it's coming to the end of your expat posting. So it's based on a magazine article that we did in Expat Living. So you can find that on their website, expatliving.sg. And we're just going through some of the factors and some of the things to think about if you're about to come to the end of your posting. So in this case study, the people have been away, the couple have been away for a number of years, and it's a case of, well, where do they go after their time, and how do they plan their retirement spending, or how do they pay for their retirement? So it's everything that regards to everything to do with that. Okay, so my name's Andrew Tower, and let's go through some of the factors. So when you're doing your financial planning, there's a key term, long-term cash flow forecasting, and this really does bleed or factor into every single part of your planning. So the retirement planning, the investments, protection, i.e. insurances, buying a house, passing on assets to the next generation, paying that tax, education, risk profiling, everything will come from the cash flow. So what are your income, what's your expenses? And as you go through life, you'll have bigger expenses and you'll have more income, depending on what those capital outlays are, depending on what's happening in your life. But if you're planning your retirement as an expat, then where do you start? An expat is obviously slightly different to maybe someone just living in their home country, because you'll have currency, you'll have different jurisdictions, you'll have multiple taxes, you'll have visa and resident issues to stay in if you're staying in multiple different countries, or you're retiring to a number of different destinations. So it does make maybe a 2D financial plan for someone in their home country into a 3D plan. You just add in an extra layer, an extra dimension to that retirement. So we have to take that into account when we're building the plan for someone. So where do you start? First of all, you've got to assess your current assets and liabilities and income and expenditure. The basic part of a plan is to see what have you got, what do you owe, where's the money coming from, and where do you want to spend it. When you come into retirement, people can tend to predict what their expenditure is likely to be in those first couple of years after they've stopped working, or their work has slowed down. They may be part-time a lot more accurately than they can if they're trying to do 10 years, 15 years into the future. It's easier to do for obviously in the next year or so. You need to add in your goals and aspirations, and we'll come on to the aspirational part and how this has an impact on the forecasting. But if you wanted to pass assets to your kids, or you wanted to go on holiday at certain points, what do you want to do in your retirement? Includes some future changes in the situation, and also some of the economic conditions. Now, the economic conditions could be a change in tax rates. It could be the fact that you can't live in a particular country anymore, or you don't want to live in that particular country. So adjusting the plan based on the likelihood that your future is going to change. It will change. That's the only consistent part of this. When we're doing the plans, it will change. And then we sort of identify the income shortfalls and the surpluses, and then we do some what if strategies. So what if you buy another house? What if you buy a boat? Everything that goes along with that. And then you get your plan at the end of it. So this is your plan. This is what you're going to spend. This is what you're going to do, and you adjust it as you go through. And that's what we do as for retirement as an expat. Bear in mind that we're adding in currency, and we're adding in different tax rates for different countries and different jurisdictions, just to make it a little bit more complicated. So if we go back to future income needs, it's really what retirement tends to be about. What are you going to spend this money? And when are you going to spend this money? Where? So we have three categories: baseline, lifestyle, and aspirational. So the baseline income is your day-to-day expenses, covering the household, eating and drinking, etc. Medical insurance, that tends to be a factor for expats, mainly because you don't necessarily you're in one country. So we tend to use that as the baseline income. All of the maybe expenses of moving between countries, there is a degree of that comes into it as an expat. Then the next one is lifestyle spending. So generally this is, how many holidays do you want a year? Do you want to be a member of that golf club? Do you want to go out a certain amount of times? It's the lifestyle extra that generally people push into retirement. How do they want to spend it? How many times do you want to go on holiday? Everything else like that. If you're a expat, then that lifestyle may be baseline, just because you're in a couple of different countries. And you can see that we've got a plane as an example, but really that could be that you're just baseline because you have to travel between your two countries that you're living, for instance. And then we're into aspirational spending. So this really is capital outlays, stuff like we want to buy a car every other year, or I want to buy a boat on the day that I retire because I want to spend a year just traveling around the world on it. So it's aspirational, can move into lifestyle, can move into baseline. It really depends on what your priorities are and how you want to spend your retirement. So as long as we plan it, we should take into account that these are the expected outlays going into the future. And really what it comes down to is, how do you allocate your assets across all of your investments, all of your income streams to meet those categories. And that's the important part of this, so that you don't run out of money and you haven't got too much cash that's been eroded by inflation. You're not in too riskier assets because you need that to get a particular growth rate. So it's understanding all of these components in order to make sure your plan will work, and obviously it gets adjusted. So let's look at the case study. So this is Charles and Anna, okay? And they've got one daughter, Beatrice, who's like 23, and they're coming up to retirement. So they've been abroad for a number of years, and you can see where we've got those three categories starting to come into the plan already. So 65, he wants to buy a boat, okay? And then at 69, they want to give a wedding gift to Beatrice. So immediately you've got two aspirational capital outlays, and then we'll come on to the fact that they've got a baseline and they've got their lifestyle spending. The timeline really is up until the point that actuarially you don't survive any longer. There's a polite way of putting it. But if you look at the timeline here, we have retirement and then we have slowdown. So slowdown really is that you're not necessarily spending as much money as you would in those initial years of retirement. Doesn't mean that you're going to be spending less money. You may find that there's long-term care fees to provide for. But in this case, we're keeping it quite high level. We're not going into huge amounts of detail. But if we're going to plan into the 80s and the 90s, then really it's a case of, okay, do we need to add in long-term care fees and the cost of those? If you're an expat, then generally you might find that you're not doing those two countries, you're doing one country, just because the travel between those two countries is becoming, you just don't want to do it. So it's understanding what that plan is. In this scenario, the couple have got some rental income, and we'll come on to that. And then we've seen that they've got basic expenses, which is their household, and then the lifestyle, which is their leisure expenses, holidays, and then they've got those, as I said, aspirational spending, which is the boat and the wedding gift. So again, very high level, but you can see where the three categories have now come into play in this case study. So what does this look like? Now, we use software to plan someone's futures, financial planning software. And it's got to log me out now, isn't it? Of course. So let's log back in. stop this share whilst I log back in. Technology, eh? Always never works. Okay, right, we can now share this. Okay, so this is the couple we had before. Now let's go to their timeline. So you can see that along the bottom, we've got those retirement dates and we've got the slowdowns, and there's the wedding gift and there's the boats. Okay, let's have a quick look at what they've got initially. So you can see that they've got some savings investments, and then they've got those properties that we talked about. So there's 2 buy-to-let properties, and then there's a boat purchase and some insurance. And then the insurance isn't necessary at this point, but the expenses. So we've got very high level, but we've got base expense, leisure expense, and then the milestones. So baseline, lifestyle, and aspirational. Now, if we go up to cash flow, and let's make it a bit more detailed so that we can see more about what it is. Again, Charles and Anna's retirement, the black line is total need, and there's a blue line, which is basic need. So in their first year, they've got their basic need, which is the baseline, and then they've got total need, which is the lifestyle, and then actually some of the aspirational will come into that. So in the second year, when they come to retire, there's a big jump in their cash flow because they're buying a boat. So it's that's the marginal one. And then when they come to 69, another big jump in the total needs because they're making a gift to Beatrice for her wedding. But we can see that as we're going through, the basic need is increasing depending on what inflation levels we set, what growth rates we set on the assets, or the expenditure, inflation, everything that goes into what you're going to spend every year. And then as we get into, say, that slowdown period, we can see that it's actually dropped off, maybe because they're not traveling between maybe a couple of different countries. So it does tend to fall off again. If we added in care fees, then we might see certain spikes, and the assets might decrease a lot more. So this is an example of their detailed assets. So you can see the green really is property, where it's starting to decrease, increase, whereas the investments will decrease because they're taking income from that as a point. So we can see that they've got enough assets. There's not a shortfall, but they probably could spend more. So if I go to retirement spending, let's see what they can actually spend in retirement without them running out of money. So you can see that the graph has now changed, where their actual income can be a lot higher than what they are currently forecasted. So they could have a better lifestyle if they wanted to, or they could spend a lot more. And there's a couple of studies recently show that in pensioners or retirees, they spend less than what they could, so they're not necessarily enjoying their lifestyle so much because they're worried about running out of money. So if we can show people that you're not going to run out of money, or the what if strategies of how much you can spend in retirement before you run out of money, maybe it provides a degree of security to know that you can start to enjoy that retirement because you've got an understanding of what your finances look like. So that's really what we're trying to do with the software, is to show you that planning your future can mean that you enjoy it a little bit more. So in this case, they've got more money to spend. Now, if I go back to my presentation. So this is the next stage. How does the financial forecasting determine the asset allocation for really those baseline lifestyle and aspirational income requirements? So in the case study, we had Charles and Anna, and they had their rental income, didn't they? So that was, to a certain extent, providing a lot of their baseline income. Okay. If we were to structure their assets, then we'll find that they should have 2 years worth of cash to fund really the baseline and the lifestyle income. You could probably take off what the rental income comes in it. So they know that they've got their cash reserves sitting there. Over the longer period, cash gets eroded by inflation. So it's not necessarily a great thing to have 25 years worth of expenses sitting in cash. You'll just erode it by having, you just get eroded by inflation. The next 5 years in this example, we could say that you need to have fixed interest and corporate bonds as baseline and lifestyle expenses. So that cash isn't getting eroded by inflation. So it's maintaining it normally with a fixed interest, sort of inflation-proofed deposit, or corporate bonds, or gilts, or government bonds, something that isn't equity, and that's keeping pace with inflation. And then the remaining part is allocated in equity, because the timeline shows, if I go back to that previous, if we look at the timeline, they're retiring at, say, 65, but they've got 25 years before they're into the slowdown at least. So holding 25 years in corporate bonds or cash means that real asset is just going to be eroded by inflation. So they do need some equity positions, because they're not going to be drawing down on that particular part of their investment portfolio for 20, 30 years maybe. And even if they pass it on to, say, Beatrice, it could be even longer. So it is understanding that your allocation should be determined by your own plan, your own forecasting. So the remaining equity, or the remaining assets, should be held in equity. And then there's a whole different level of, well, what type of equities does that get held in? And then as you pass through the year, where an advisor should be adding some value there is to say, well, what's your spending pattern this year? What's your baseline? What's your lifestyle income? Have we got any aspirational capital outlays that we have to budget for or take into account? And then we're moving the asset allocation, i.e. we're going from we're holding a little bit more cash, we're holding a little bit more fixed interest, and we're reducing our equity position, because you're going through that timeline. So the plan is all about going into that at that point. Again, very high level. And if you have any questions, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, then on YouTube, then there are a number of different ways that obviously you can contact me: email, give me a phone call, Facebook on our Facebook page, LinkedIn, we have a LinkedIn page, and there's Twitter as well. You can stop me in the street if you want to do as well. So there's lots of different ways to get in contact. And then we will plan your retirement in the same way that we've done today. So thank you very much.